All right, it is 7:02, and we are pros at starting on time. So we are going to kick off tonight's webinar. So as a Terp alumna myself, I remember applying to Maryland about 14 years ago, unsure where exactly I would end up. So I grew up in Howard County, Maryland, and I remember thinking that I just wanted to go to a college out of state without really giving Maryland a fair consideration at the time. So, fast forwarding to today, I can confidently say that attending Maryland was one of the best decisions that I have made in my life, providing me with lots of opportunities that I didn't even know existed. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to our seventh annual Becoming a Terp webinar. I know that with us this evening are some of the proudest Terp alums and some of the most excited prospective Terps eager to learn more about the University of Maryland and what it has to offer. So my name is Jessica Lee, and I am the Director of Engagement and Outreach at the Alumni Association. And I also am a double Terp with a bachelor's degree in neurobiology and a master's degree in higher education. So not only did I spend some of my favorite years in College Park as an undergraduate and graduate student, but I have also been fortunate enough to spend almost 10 years post-graduation working at the University of Maryland. I always joke about how I loved Maryland so much that I literally never left, and well, you can see that it's true. The university has over 40,000 students, nearly 30,000 of which are undergraduates. These undergraduate students study in 12 academic colleges, representing over 90 different majors, have internships here in the DMV, on the West Coast, and across the globe, and also get involved across campus in the over 800 student clubs and organizations. For the prospective Terps here with us tonight, if there's one thing that I'd like you to take away from attending this session, it's that the University of Maryland Alumni Association is here to support every student from day one. The Alumni Association strives to improve the experience of prospective and current Terps through our many career resources to connect students with internship and job opportunities, as well as programs like the Student Alumni Leadership Council to help students connect with Maryland traditions and Terp alums. For the Terp alums in the webinar tonight, we are here for you as well and want to help deepen your connection with your alma mater and strengthen the Maryland traditions that you love. Remember, you are a Terp for life. So we offer resources for any stage of your life, whether you're looking for support to make a career change or have recently retired and want to enjoy learning from Maryland faculty, or want to volunteer to support your Terp community. We hope you'll take advantage of all the programs that are offered by your alumni association. If you'd like to learn more about these opportunities, feel free to send me an email and I'd be happy to connect you with the relevant options, and we will follow up with you after the webinar. So with that being said, let's get started with the bulk of the presentation and why you all are attending this webinar tonight. So tonight you'll be hearing from Maggie Much, Senior Admissions Coordinator with the Office of Undergraduate Admissions here at the University of Maryland. Maggie is also a proud Terp alumna who graduated in 2016 with degrees in communication and English literature and language. So we hope you leave today's program with an understanding of how to be a competitive applicant to Maryland, tips for completing your application, and how to apply using one of the two application platforms, Common App and the Standout Admissions Network. We also have admissions counselor Raquel here with us this evening to help answer some questions throughout the webinar. So as you all have questions during this time, please feel free to pose those using the Zoom Q&A feature during the presentation. Some of those questions we might answer just as they come directly through the Q&A feature. We also will answer some questions live at the end of Maggie's presentation during our Q&A portion. So thank you all again for being here. And without further ado, let's begin by welcoming Maggie.
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be with you all this evening. It is admittedly a little dreary where I'm coming to you live from in the District of Columbia. We have some storms coming in, but being with you all this evening is truly bringing some sunshine into my Monday. As Jess so kindly introduced me, my name is Maggie Much, and I am a very proud alum of the University of Maryland. I'm also a part of a Terp family. My younger sister graduated just a year after I did from the University of Maryland, and my husband also went here as well. So being a Terrapin certainly runs deep in my family and something I know a lot of us on the call take a lot of pride in. As just mentioned, the bulk of our time this evening is going to be touching on a little bit about the admission process, what makes an applicant competitive, what we review when it comes to applications, what makes an application complete, and knowing that all of us have some sort of connection to the University of Maryland on the call, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about campus itself, but did want to touch ever so briefly for maybe our students who haven't had a chance to touch down boots on the ground in College Park just yet, but might have an alum in their family. All right. Now, in terms of campus and College Park itself, I'm sure all of our prospective students who have a parent, grandparent, aunt, uncle, sibling, guardian, whoever it may be who led you to join us this evening, probably know a little bit about our campus life. Good to share some statistics and some other fun facts about campus. As Jess also mentioned, we are a pretty large institution. We're about 30,000 undergraduate students. I always like to talk about the University of Maryland, regardless of who I'm discussing it with, someone who's very familiar, very unfamiliar with that number, and want to take a second to recognize that it is on the larger side. Now, that being said, at a school like the University of Maryland, certainly you are going to find so much community and you are never going to feel like you're just a number. With our size comes so much diversity, resources, and opportunities, and truly you will find this campus breaks down into these smaller communities quite quickly. Maybe it's your major you're a part of. Maybe it's one of our 800 plus student organizations that you're joining to find your social groups, to find leadership opportunities. And really, again, the campus starts to feel a lot smaller very quickly. In terms of campus life, we are located in College Park, Maryland, so right outside Washington, D.C., about 45 minutes to an hour south of Baltimore. If we were in the room live today, I would do a show of hands to see who's in state and out of state, but I know we're joined from folks from all over the U.S. today, as well as most counties in Maryland, so thank you for joining us. In terms of our student body and our geographic diversity, we have all 50 states represented on our campus, as well as 120 different countries and every county in Maryland. And when I think about the diversity of the Maryland class, whether it be our incoming freshman class each year or the student body at large, you're really going to see so much diversity in every single way you could use the word. Whether, again, geographic origin, whether it's race and ethnicity diversity, whether it's political ideology, socioeconomic background, really our students have so many similarities and differences to each other, and we find that that really gives them some of the best education possible, both in and outside of the classroom. Now, if you are a school spirit or big athletic fan, you might know that Maryland has some great athletic programs on our campus, 19 different Division I teams, as well as many, many clubs, sports, and intramural. And interestingly, depending on who's on the call and when you went to Maryland, you might have been there when we were part of the Big Ten or part of the ACC. For our prospective students, we are currently a part of the Big Ten Athletic and Academic Conference and Alliance, but I am one of the unique students who is there for about 50% of both of those experiences. We made the shift to the Big Ten during halfway into my academic career. I think not only is this important to bring up when we think about, cool things like athletics and supporting the Terps on the field, court, or mats, collaborating and playing in schools like Rutgers for my home state of New Jersey. But even if you are not a student athlete, the Big Ten Academic Alliance also has a lot of benefits for you as well. Whether it's research opportunities or resources from their online libraries, study abroad opportunities, or other ways we connect with our Big Ten partners, it again just further strengthens the Maryland experience. Now, I know, again, a lot of us are very familiar with campus, so I did want to share some changes that may have been coming to our campus life in recent years. So in terms of some of our new buildings that have come to campus recently, the Brennan I. Reed Center for Computer Science opened just a few years ago, as well as the Edward St. John Learning and Teaching Center. Now, this particular building hosts different academic disciplines, so not just one department, whereas Brennan I. Reed is computer science focused only. Then we also just opened a couple of years ago a new engineering building called A. James Clark Hall. A few other new additions to our campus. Somewhat most recently, I guess I would say, would be Heritage Community, which is two brand new residence hall, as well as a new dining hall for our students. Truth be told, the admissions office was just there last week having lunch. It is delicious. For any Terps who are closer to my age, it has changed a lot where instead of paying per item, it's 7 day a week, anytime dining for our students. So anytime it's open and they have a meal plan, they can go in and scan their hand and go eat to their heart's delight. We also opened up Thurgood Marshall Hall, which is the new home to our School of Public Policy. About, 10 or 11 years ago, we all just started offering a major in public policy. And being that we are so close to Washington, D.C., that's often a really exciting choice for a lot of our students. I saw a question coming in the chat just to address that too. We are planning to record and share this session after, so no worries about taking notes or committing anything to memory this evening. Last on this slide is our Idea Factory, which is a really cool makerspace with 3D printers and a lot of think tank elements for not only our engineer computer science students to use, but all of the University of Maryland community. So some really, really cool opportunities there. All right, now I'm going to jump a little bit more into our academics before we transition to the admissions section. I think probably arguably one of the most important things about the college decision is certainly considering academics. Now, I mean that whether you know exactly what you want to do or you're a student who's completely undecided, and that's okay too. Now, unfortunately, because we do offer 100 plus majors, I don't have room to list all of them on our website, or excuse me, on this slide here, but you could certainly take a look at them on the admissions website now underneath our academic section, or even just Google University of Maryland majors, and it will show you them all listed out. Now, to give you an idea of, again, how this big school starts to break down into some smaller communities, I like to share the majors and colleges this way, broken down by school and college. Now, we are all University of Maryland students and staff and faculty, but you might also be a student in the Robert H. Smith School of Business or in the College of Education. So while you, of course, have access to all the resources and opportunity of the university at large, you also get that smaller school feeling within your academic college and program. Even within each school and college, you're going to find some smaller communities within your individual major. So for example, as just shared, I was an English and communication double major. Both of those were a part of the College of Arts and Humanities. So I had the arts and humanities community as one of my circles academically, but also some of the resources and closer knit relationships within my individual majors as well. Whether it's your advisor who is specific to your program of study, your peers who are within your major as well, you're really getting to know them a lot more closely over the years. And we do have a student to faculty ratio of 18:1 despite our large student body. Now, if you're a student who is undecided, that is perfectly okay. You would enter the university as what we call letters and sciences. And this is our undeclared undecided advising track that students can stay in up until about 2 years or 60 credits. So you wouldn't graduate with a degree in letters and sciences. However, you'd be in that track while you're finishing what we call general education requirements, courses your peers who have also declared a major are taking and are required to take as well. And really, they'll do a great job at helping you figure out what it is you'd like to study. And as important to that process as circling things you're passionate about is, so is crossing things off the list. And again, you're still taking general education classes, so you're not falling behind. Maybe you're sampling a public policy class to try that out for size alongside a government and politics. Maybe a journalism class, maybe physics, maybe computer science. As you're working through your different requirements to graduate with a Maryland degree, you're able to try on different academic hats and figure out what lights that passion in your belly. If you are a student who's interested in double majoring, you certainly may do so across different schools and colleges. You would just have an academic advisor specific to each program. So if you pursued a double major in elementary education and in journalism, you'd have one advisor for education and one for journalism. That way they know the alumni, the courses, and the professors very well for your program of choice. Now, some majors are what we call limited enrollment programs. I can be the first to admit that the word limited can sometimes have a little bit of a negative or scary connotation, but I promise once we break down and unpack exactly what this means, it will really seem a lot more straightforward. Essentially, these are majors or programs on campus that have just been so incredibly popular over the last 5 or 10 years that we need to limit how many students are enrolled in each of these programs or majors each year or semester. And the reason we need to do that is to ensure that everyone in that program has access to the classes that they need to meet with their advisor, not just when it's required, but when they would like to, that they're able to take advantage of the outside of the classroom experiences like the Bloomberg Terminal for the School of Business. And really just, again, make sure that the size of the class is manageable to ensure the quality of the education is never compromised. Now, the big thing you really need to take away from this presentation in terms of being a prospective student is that when it comes to admission, we review applications major blind. And what major blind means for the purposes of our processes is that when we sit down as an admission committee, we are not considering whether an applicant is interested in an LEP, a non-LEP, or is undecided. We are reviewing them at large for the university admission. After we decide that we'd like to offer a student admission, if we then see, oh, Maggie has an interest in biological sciences, for example, a committee will then also review my application for placement into that major. And that'll happen before I get my decision letter. It doesn't require a second application. It doesn't require any different materials. It's really just looking at your application from a lens a little bit more specific to your major of choice. Now, what that does mean is it's possible a student might be admitted to Maryland and to their first choice of major, but it's also possible they might be admitted and not to their first choice. Now, when that happens, we will place a student into letters and sciences instead of their first choice. So again, it wouldn't be the reason a student was denied admission from the university. And if you are not directly admitted to your first choice of major, you may still pursue that major as a current student. We call that internal transfer. You don't have to worry about it too much right now, but really good to know that because it's not an admission factor, what your major is, it's major blind. Whatever you're truly interested in and majoring, put down in your application, including if you're not sure and undecided. And B, if you're not directly admitted as a freshman, you may pursue admission once as a current student. With all of our limited enrollment programs, except for computer science and business, they have what we call a non-competitive review for current students, which is a long way of saying if you're not admitted as a freshman, you can come to the university, complete a set of requirements, and if you meet the minimum requirements, you'll be admissible to the major. Computer science and business are a little different in the sense they have a competitive review. So think about applying to the University of Maryland or any other school. You may have a target school, a reach school, a safety school, so to speak, but you don't necessarily know what the admission decision is going to be. Competitive admission. Same thing with business and computer science. When you're applying as a current student, there will be a set of minimum requirements, and then students are reviewed holistically and competitively for placement into those majors. I know that was a lot of information. Really what I want you to take away now is major blind, and that if you're not directly admitted, you can pursue it as a current student. All right, wonderful. Now the next thing I want to touch on is something called living and learning programs, and then we're going to transition to talk a bit more about the admission process itself. Part of the admission process, however, though, will be review for what we call living and learning programs. But before I start about how we review students for those, I think it's helpful to define what they are. Living and learning programs, the title gets straight to the point. These are programs where students will live in the same residence hall or section of a residence hall as a group or cohort and take a few classes or class each semester or years, depending on how long their program lasts, while they're at the university. Now, these are not majors, nor are they minors, though I might compare a little bit more closely to a minor. With all of our living and learning programs, these are, really intending to foster a sense of community early on. So students are going to be coming from different majors, different high schools, different backgrounds. They're going to have different interests, but they'll have something that ties them together. And again, it's our hope that early on, that's what fosters a sense of community. Very often there might be mentorship components with upperclassmen who are either in the program as well or alumni of the program, and connections with faculty and staff. Our two largest living and learning programs are what we call the Honors College and College Park Scholars, and think of them both as kind of umbrellas. So we're all, for example, Honors College students if we're in the Honors College Living and Learning program, but students are also going to be in a sub-program. So for example, within Honors, we have an advanced cybersecurity program, we have an Honors business program, we have Gemstone, which is our 4-year research thesis project students begin their freshman year. Within Scholars, we have a program dedicated to community service and social justice-based learning, an Art Scholars program, an environmental science-based program as well. And again, these are, oh, you're still a College Park Scholar student, but in a sub-program as well. We also have some smaller programs like FIRE, which is the first year innovative research experience, as well as Carillon Communities, which again is an umbrella program that has some sub-programs that shift each academic year, but really challenge students to think creatively about some of the world's most challenging problems. And again, I think what's interesting is unlike some peer institutions, you are not necessarily in the Honors College for your major or for your minor, but for your living and learning program. You're in Scholars for your living and learning program. So it's a great way to maybe diversify what you're studying. Just because you're a computer science major, for example, doesn't mean you have to be in the advanced cybersecurity honors program. You could instead preference being in the arts or the honors humanities program if you want to, take on a little bit of a different discipline. Same thing if maybe you're a social science major and you want to be in that honors cybersecurity program, a great way to diversify what you're studying there. Now, for all of my prospective students on the call, hopefully what I'm about to say next is good news, especially my rising seniors. I know you're very, very busy. There's nothing extra students need to do to be reviewed for any of our living and learning programs, including our Honors College on campus, beyond applying to our November 1st early action deadline. And I'll share plenty about that in just a few slides. All right, now we are going to pivot a little bit more to the admissions section. Everything is a little bit admissions based in theory, but one thing I do want to mention on the next few slides is everything I'm about to share is on our website. So again, while we are going to be sharing the recording, please don't feel like you have to, take a bunch of notes or commit anything to memory right now. I promise no quiz at the end. All right, now each year when we sit down as an admission committee, it is our goal to build and invite a freshman class that is, of course, going to be ready academically to handle the rigorous course load at the university, but is also going to be bringing a special set of skills, perspectives, talents, to the university, students who are going to contribute to the diverse campus body that we have. And we do so considering 24 different admission factors. Now, I won't read each one to you individually right now, but something you might be noticing as you start to review them yourself or you take a look at them on our website at a future date is about a third of our factors are academic in nature. I think for us, that's an important thing to highlight because we have a relatively competitive process. Academics and how a student has performed previously is a pretty big factor in our decision. But outside of that, you're going to notice there are a lot of things that we are thinking out, and they're very, very varied. I think it's really important to know that this is not a rubric, nor is there a set percentage. Each of these factors is important to the individual decision. Whether you are from the same state, county, high school, maybe even you're an identical twin to somebody, I promise you your lived experience is probably not exactly the same, which is to say how these 24 factors are or are not a part of your story certainly could be very different, even if it's the friend sitting next to you on the school bus, even if it's a sibling. So you may be looking at these and saying, extracurriculars, absolutely, I'm super engaged with my community in high school, and awesome, we love to see it. But maybe we have another student who doesn't have any extracurriculars on their application at all, but maybe they work 20 to 30 hours outside of high school to help save for college or support their family. Maybe we have a third student who doesn't have extracurriculars and doesn't work, but has a special role at home taking care of a family member. Maybe they help take care of a grandparent. Maybe they help pick up a younger sibling and help them with homework and get dinner on the table. Everybody's story is a little bit different, so maybe if you think of it as a sliding scale, that can help. For some students, family involvement and what that special role is super important. For some, it's going to be extracurriculars. For some, it might be work. If you're a student, for example, who learned English as a second language when you moved here or when you were younger, that's going to be a pretty big part of your story in some cases. Where if you're like me and you were born in New Jersey and are unfortunately not bilingual, I just struggle a little bit with the language learning in high school. In that case, English as a second language is not a big part of my story, and that's okay. Really keep in mind, these are not a rubric. It's really, really just giving us a lot to think about as an admission committee when we talk about your application. Now, this is probably the toughest group to share this information with, and I do it every single summer. One thing you will notice that is not on this list is if your parent is an alumni of the University of Maryland. That is not a factor in our admission process. You will notice on the application, we do ask where your parents attended college, if they did attend college, but it's not a factor in our decision. I know that can be tough news when we have a special relationship to the University of Maryland. I love it as well, and I hope my future children become Terps. But students, I hope you can rest assured that if you are admitted, it is fully on your own merit, and we are proud to have you on a Terp based only on your application materials and factors. All right, now as just mentioned, we actually have two different application platforms you can use to apply to the University of Maryland. The first is what we call the Common Application. Admittedly, this is a little bit more of the popular application we see with over 90% of our applicants using it, but we don't have either preference. The reason this might be is the Common App has been around since 1975. So it's a little bit older. It has over 900 schools. We might actually be getting close to breaking 1,000 very shortly, and it can be a little bit more well known in the college application world. We also are part of the Standout Admission Network. Truth be told, whether you use Common App or Standout, it's going to look almost exactly the same when it comes across our desk. So what I often tell students is whatever works best for you works best for us. Again, really beyond the logo, nothing looks that different when it comes across my desk. Often I tell students, if you're applying to 7 schools and 6 of them are on Common App, probably makes sense to use Common App to apply to Maryland. But up to you as a freshman applicant, and for our transfer applicants, we're exclusive to the Standout College Admission Network. All right, now how do we get a sense of how those 24 factors I shared 2 or 3 slides ago are a part of your story? We use 5, maybe 4, and I'll expand on what I mean by that in just a second, different materials to really get a sense of who you are as best we can. Now, the first thing that we require for your application to be considered complete, this probably won't shock anybody on the call, is the application itself. And that does include a $75 application fee. However, there are some automatic waivers that if you answer yes to certain questions, it may waive your application fee. For example, if you are receiving free and reduced lunch at your high school and you answer yes in the application, it's going to automatically waive that application fee for you. If there's extenuating circumstances and you would like to reach out due to a financial hardship being a barrier to you applying, you can have your high school counselor, or if you're working with an independent counselor, email our office and inquire about the process of possibly getting that waived for you as well. Now, within the application itself is going to be inclusive of the essay. And hopefully this is also good news for our prospective students. We do not have a University of Maryland specific essay. We use the personal statement options that are included in the Common Application, which is each year, depending on the year you're applying, about 5 to 7 different personal statement prompts you can choose from, including a create your own essay option. Now, the essay does not have to speak to the University of Maryland. If you feel you would like it to, absolutely, that's fine. That works for us. But I often tell students my best advice is to make sure that you are the subject of the essay. I know about the University of Maryland. I went here and I worked here, but I want to learn about you. And if you think about it, kind of uniquely, the essay is the only place I actually get to hear your voice come through. It's not really your voice when I'm reading a resume, but in your essay, it really, really is. And for that reason, it can be one of the most exciting parts of the application to read. Whether it's your past, your present, your future, really go in any direction you would like, as long as you're the center of the essay. Again, we do not have a Maryland-specific essay. We do have a couple of short answers. We increase the character limit as to not cut students off, but really think of these as filling in the end of a sentence or a few lines. So for example, one we use in most years is I feel like a leader when blank. Or in addition to my major, my academic interests include. Again, this is not another essay, so don't feel you need to write us another one, but really just a chance for us to get to know you a little bit better. And often these questions can be helpful for some of the more nuanced parts of our review, like reviewing students for our living and learning programs, such as the Honors College and College Park Scholars. Also within the application will be the activities and award sheet or resume of the sorts. So really any and all things you've been a part of over the last 4 years of high school you can include, whether it's in your school community, whether it's in your community itself, your religious organization, or your family. Again, any and all things can be included there. Maybe it's something you just did one summer. Maybe it's something you've done all 4 years you were in high school. Either way, I promise you, we're interested. I know it's not in our human nature to brag, but this is the time. So that's within the application itself. It'll also include your basic demographic information, your name, your date of birth, where you're going to high school, your essay, and your resume. Outside of that, we're also going to need your counselor letter and your teacher letter recommendation. We can get a lot of great information from these two letters. However, if you feel strongly about an additional letter, you are welcome to send it. I just always encourage students to think about, is this going to add something different to my application? For example, if you are someone who's very involved in the theater, and maybe you have a stage director that you would like to write a letter of recommendation to speak to a little bit more of the context of who you are in theater and the arts. Maybe you have an employer or a mentor. The reason I bring up bringing a different thing to the table is, our teachers, they do a wonderful service to our students writing these letter of recommendation, but it isn't technically in most cases in their job description. So I always say because we require one, there's no really need for us to have a second one unless you feel it's going to be bringing something much different to the conversation. Probably not surprising, we need a copy of your official high school transcripts. And if you are a student who attended more than one high school, we are going to ask that you send us a copy from each high school. And if it comes from your most recent school, that's very much so fine. If you are someone who also took advantage of college classes, maybe over the summer or dually enrolled, and you've completed those, we'll ask for a copy of those transcripts as well. Now, each year I'm asked, what GPA does it take to get into the University of Maryland? I'll see your GPA when I see your transcript, but truth be told, it's kind of like comparing apples to oranges to grapes. There are schools that use a 4.0 scale, a 5.0 scale, a 100 scale, some that just use narrative descriptions. So a 4.0 at one school might be straight A's in the most demanding courses, and another school, it might be some C's in somewhat demanding courses. A long way of saying, while we will see your GPA, it's really not what we're factoring our decision on. The reason our timeline can feel a little bit lengthy is we are really looking very closely at every material. And in the case of the transcript, we're starting in 9th grade. What classes did the student take? What grades did they earn? Same thing in 10th and same thing in 11th. We pay a lot of attention to trend. How were these students' grades from 9th grade to 10th grade? Were they consistently strong? Were there any upward trends? Were there any downward trends? And same thing with rigor. We'd like to see our students challenge themselves a little bit more each academic year. But again, that might be looking different whether you are at one high school or another, or even just where you started 9th grade versus your peer, even if that peer is your twin sibling. What it means to take the most challenging course load of classes at my alma mater, my high school, might be very different from one of the high schools down the road. So really, we're looking at you not only in the context of your own academic journey, but within your high school as well. If you are a rising senior, we are test optional through fall and spring 2025. For any of my underclassmen who are prospective students, stay tuned. It is set to expire in 2025, but I don't necessarily think it's off the table that we would be in discussion to continue that because we've done some really interesting long-term case studies with test optional. Just to give you an idea of what test optional means at the University of Maryland, for us, it's when you sit down to fill out your application, you will be asked, would you like your test scores considered or not? And two paths to, really emerge for our students in the woods, and you get to tell us, yes, I'd like them considered or not. And often I'm asked, is that going to mean that my application is less strong if I don't have test scores? And I'm going to go back to the 24 factor slide for a second because I think it helps exemplify what it means for our process. What it truly just means is we would have 23 factors in your case instead of 24. So if I took out SAT and ACT scores here, I would just have one less thing to consider. And let's say if we compare this to a high school class, I might be in a high school biology class and I have 5 exams this semester to get to my final grade. But in my history class, I have 4 exams to get to my final grade. I'm getting to the final grade the same way. I just have one less factor review in this class than this. Same thing with test optional. It might be helpful to know we've been test optional now for 4 cycles, and each year about somewhere between 49 to 50% of our students choose to send scores and the other half chooses not to. We can't choose what students are choosing on their end, but I think it is interesting. It breaks down to be about halfway. And over the last 4 years, we've been test optional. Those we've admitted, about half have had test scores and about half had not. I think that's also a really helpful note because I don't, again, want students to be under the perception that having scores or not would be the reason that they were denied or admitted. If they are there and you've asked us to use them, we will use them though. So test optional doesn't mean we would ignore a 0 on the SAT if you send it. And on the flip side of that, if you say, no, I don't want my scores considered, and you then send us a perfect score on the ACT, unfortunately, you've asked us not to consider those scores, so I will not be doing so. It's It's a very personal decision, student to student. Very often, my advice, if you've chosen to sit for the exams and you're thinking about whether you want to use your scores or not, is to take a look at last year's averages. Our averages for our class of fall 2024 should be up on our website in the next few weeks. I know it's August, it seems crazy, but we are still technically wrapping down our fall 2024 cycle. But you'll see those averages up in early fall. And again, this is very personal and certainly might differ student to student. And in some cases, it might even within one student vary school to school. You might send your scores to the University of Maryland and not to another school, and vice versa. I touched already on the activities and award sheet and the essay. I want to touch very briefly on something we call the Terp application portal. Essentially, this is a portal you get access to after you submit your application, and it's where students are able to track their application documents to make sure everything is here. Now, we will not start reviewing until after our deadline, but I tell students some of my best advice is to apply early. I don't mean it has to be done tonight, but I mean maybe a week ahead. And the reason I say that is we are all human. Give yourself time to make mistakes. I have worked at the University of Maryland admissions office since 2014, and every single year, without fail, I've worked with a student who has accidentally realized after our deadline that they sent their SAT scores to the University of Maryland, Baltimore County. Now, go Retrievers, and they are an excellent in-state peer institution of ours. However, they're an entirely separate institution. I know our names sound very familiar. We all have the same state government boss. We're a part of the state family, but it's a separate school. If you realize that mistake on November 2nd, you are going to be part of our regular deadline, and I'll talk about why you might not think that's ideal in just a few minutes. But if you realize that mistake on October 20th, all good. Let's re-request those scores and send them to the University of Maryland College Park. Same thing, with just forgetting to request a letter of recommendation. If you see it's not in your Terp application portal a week before the deadline, you can touch base with that teacher versus after the deadline. It could be harder to ensure that document, we're able to verify it should have been here on time. I hope this doesn't come across harsh or scary, but we do feel that a Maryland ready student is going to be responsible to check and ensure that all of the required documents are here. We typically now get about somewhere between 55 to 60,000 applications a year for our freshman admission process. Unfortunately, we just don't have the Terp power to call every single student and say, "Hi, Maggie, I noticed that you never sent in your official transcripts. Please make sure you do so by the 1st." Again, it is a really on the student to take ownership of this process and ensure all required documents are here. Documents can take a few days. SAT scores, for example, typically don't send the next day towards the end of October. So another reason I often say start on the earlier side is to give time for things to process, for them to process in our system, have the least scary Halloween of all time, and just know you are good to go and all set. I know I just threw a lot at you on this slide very quickly. Just to kind of recap the application materials, it's the application itself, which is inclusive of the essay and the activities and award sheet, a counselor letter recommendation, a teacher letter recommendation, official transcripts, and then standardized test scores optional. One last thing to note here, for any student who is a non-native English speaker or who is an international student, I'm not sure if we have anyone joining us from abroad tonight on the call, we may also require proof of English proficiency. We require this for, again, any student who's a non-native English speaker. So for example, if you've taken ESOL in high school, we would require proof of English proficiency on your behalf. We have an excellent chart on our website that goes through who this might apply to and some exemptions as well, and links to the 3 exams that we would take in place to satisfy your proof of English proficiency. Certainly not the last least on this slide to talk about timelines. Our big day is November 1st. This is our fall early action deadline, and you might notice it's actually the only deadline for freshmen I listed on this slide. We are all going to forget that the second deadline even exists because, truth be told, it is really, really a lot more rigorously competitive, and I want everyone on this call to just go forward and go righteously towards November 1st. I'm about to throw a really big number your way. We typically take 90 to 95% of our class from the early action pool. That's a really big number. When we sit down to even start reviewing regular deadline, space is incredibly, incredibly, incredibly tight, which means often our decisions are even more rigorous than they are in the early action pool. Every single year I'm asked by rising seniors, What can I do to make my application stand out? What can I do to increase my chance of admission? The number one thing you can do is not only apply by November 1st, but ensure your application is complete by November 1. And again, that's why I took a little bit of time to really reiterate for us, complete is not submitting the application. For us, complete is ensuring all documents are here by the deadline. And it's by the deadline, but I don't even like to play the game of, is it tonight at midnight on the 31st or the 1st at 11:59? Let's just make sure everything's here by November 1. If you apply by November 1 early action, you're also automatically reviewed for our living and learning programs. So our honors college, our College Park Scholars program, the FIRE program as well, without any additional application components. Students in our regular deadline are not reviewed for these programs. And last but certainly not least, certainly a big important to our factors, this will also automatically review you for our merit-based scholarships. Students in our regular deadline are not reviewed for these either. Again, I don't say this to scare students away, maybe a little bit from regular deadline, but early action is truly in your benefit and it's non-binding. I hope you're excited if you're admitted, but you don't have to come to Maryland. You still have until May 1st, most years, to let us know if you'll be attending. All right, now when you get that decision by February 1st, what are you going to find out from that letter? What will it tell you? Well, the first thing is, of course, the decision. And I'm going to talk on the next slide about all the possible decisions you might see, and you'll know if you've been admitted to the University of Maryland or not. You also will see if you've been invited to one of our special programs, so honors, scholars, FIRE program, and your admitted major. As I mentioned a few slides ago, we have some programs called limited enrollment programs. So you would know, for example, if you were directly admitted to biological sciences or if instead you were placed into letters and sciences. You will also know your residency for tuition purposes. And I say tuition purposes because you might very well live in Maryland, but how you fill out the residency form or application within the admissions application could impact your status. I will be perfectly candid. I don't work with the residency process. It's its own office within the registrar on campus, but how students answer questions determines if they do or do not meet the in-state criteria, and you'll know at that point if you are considered in-state or out-of-state for tuition purposes. Should anyone be misclassified, they can certainly reach out to the residency reclassification team, but you'll know that in your admission letter. All right, beautiful. Now, I know this might seem a little straightforward, but there are some unique pieces of our process here that I think can be really helpful to unpack. And I want to take a second to, or a few minutes, I should say, to talk about the possible freshman admission decisions in our process. Now, I'll back up really quickly. When you're applying to colleges, in most cases, you're applying during the fall term or fall semester of your senior year of high school to enter a university or college the following fall semester. So if I was going into my senior year right now of high school, I might be working on my college applications to join the University of Maryland next fall 2025, that semester that starts at the end of August of next year. So the first decision is pretty straightforward, admittedly. I apply to the fall and I'm admitted to the fall. Now, something that's kind of unique at Maryland is if our admission committee determines we are not going to offer a student admission to the fall, we will then also automatically review them for the spring semester without them needing to indicate any interest in this at all. And to back up and give you a little bit of context on why and how, every single year we have the same problem and have had this problem for decades. We have more students apply to the University of Maryland who could be successful here than we physically have space for in our freshman class. Now, in the spring semester, we have some additional space. Students are graduating either a semester ahead or semester behind. Students are studying abroad. Students are maybe transferring out. Maybe they're participating in co-ops and taking a semester off. So we have additional space. So what we do is we will, as an admission committee, then review students we've decided not to admit to the fall. And in some cases, we may decide to offer them admission to the spring. Now, this will take place before you get your admission decision. And so if you see that you've been admitted to the spring of 2026, congratulations. This is still excellent news. We see a lot of potential for you to succeed here, and we want to celebrate that decision with you. Now, if you are admitted to the spring, there's a few options for you during that fall semester. You could take classes at another four-year institution, another two-year institution. You could work, do an internship, you could study abroad, or all of our students who applied to fall but were admitted to spring are also offered the opportunity to participate in something called Freshman Connection. And what Freshman Connection does is it's a program through our Office of Extended Studies on campus. And it allows spring admitted students to still take up to a full course load of classes that fall, but you're taking them in what we call off-peak hours. So Monday to Thursday after 3 p.m. typically, and anytime Friday. Maryland classes, Maryland professors, but they're in a time of day where we have additional classroom space available. Students in Freshman Connection can still live on campus if they would like to. For any older alum on the call, that might be a little bit different from your time. That changed during my time at Maryland. And really, for all intents and purposes, these days, the experience your first semester is really going to mirror that of any other student on campus who is fall admitted, bearing that your classes are a little bit later in the day and you can't be a Division I athlete. And that's why programs like Freshman Connection came to be, with the intention of keeping you on that 4-year graduation timeline. But certainly if you choose, maybe you're a student who's already taken some community college classes, you can also choose to spend that fall semester taking classes elsewhere. If you do choose to not take classes in the fall, presumably you probably would have an additional semester, though I guess it wouldn't really be additional because you'd just be taking a little bit later. Last decision would be if we are unfortunately not able to offer a student admission. Now, this is hard news. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. That's really difficult news if it's a school you want to go to. I'm sure many of us on the call have had that experience of not getting into a school, not getting the job, not making the team before, and that's a lot to process. So first of all, take some time and give yourself some grace because this is tough news to process. However, what it is not is a no forever. We have so many opportunities for students to join us through the transfer admission process, and really a lot of students do pursue that. Typically, we have about 1,000 transfer students join us each fall and a little under 1,000 each spring. So though you are not joining in the freshman class as maybe you originally planned, you can still join with a really vibrant and large cohort of students as well. And we have a ton of resources on our campus to really increase and make the transfer experience strong. Just to briefly touch on what makes a competitive transfer student in our early action pool for transfer, typically it's going to be about 30 college credits complete, so 1 academic year, a B average or 3.0, and college level math and English complete. We also have a pre-transfer advising office where students can get advising in terms of maybe classes they want to take or some guidance on what they should take if they're planning to transfer, hopefully keep you to the graduation timeline that you've set out for, an incredible transfer credit database for both in and out-of-state schools, and something called the Maryland Transfer Advantage Program. Now, this is a program specifically offered at select community colleges in the state of Maryland, where if students meet a certain requirements and apply early action and they're a part of this program, they're guaranteed admission as a transfer student. And the good news is even if you're not in an MTAP or Maryland Transfer Advantage Program school, the requirements for that program are also what makes a competitive transfer student. 30 credits, a 3.0, lower level math and English complete. So if you are not admitted as a freshman to the University of Maryland, take all the time you need. Whether it's 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, a year later, the admissions office is ready and excited to talk about transfer pathways with you. Now, I'll touch very briefly on this here. In terms of financing your education, the FAFSA or the free application for federal student aid most years comes out in October, and in most years will be due in maybe early December or January for the University of Maryland. I say most years. If we happen to have any parents of the most recent graduating class from high school, you may know that there were some pretty significant FAFSA delays this year at the Department of Education level, which caused us to have to push back a lot of those deadlines. I do think that's a good thing. Hopefully it speaks to the fact that should anything of the like happen next year or years going forward, we're going to be flexible with our deadlines. But you'll notice I have this past year's deadline up because we actually have not set this coming year's, but it should be set very shortly by the Office of Financial Aid. Merit-based scholarships, pretty straightforward. You just have to apply early action. All right. I know I've been doing a lot of talking at you all for the last 30, 45 minutes or so. I'm excited to get to your questions and hear what you're all wondering about and see what's going on. All right, I think actually, oh, sorry, Jess, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Hi. So thank you so much, Maggie, for sharing some helpful information regarding the undergraduate admissions application process for our prospective Terps. So I see we have some questions in the chat. So just as a reminder, please use the Q&A feature to submit your questions, and we'll just go ahead and get started. So first question that we have, I keep hearing that Maryland yield protects and that this hurts many good students from lower Montgomery County because Maryland doesn't think that they'll accept a spot. Is there a way for students to demonstrate their interest in attending Maryland Also, does Maryland have early admissions and is it easier to get in by applying early?
Yeah, great question. So I'll start with the second half of it because I think those will be quick answers, and the first might require a little bit more discussion and information sharing. Two, in the sense of is it easier early action? We haven't admitted anybody when it comes to November 1st, right? The whole 4,700 spots in our freshman class are wide open. So early action will give you a significant advantage because when we come to the regular deadline, we only typically have again about 90 to 95, we only have about 10 to 5% of our space left because we typically admit the vast majority of our students from the early action pool. To demonstrate an interest, no, that is not something we consider. I think that's in some ways, I think that can be disappointing for students to hear if they want the ability to show, look how interested I am in this school. But I think what I might share next might change your perception of that a little bit as well. You know, if you're an in-state student, or if you're an alumni, a parent's child, for example, you might have a really strong relationship with the University of Maryland without ever attending an official University of Maryland event. You might have been to swim meets here growing up. You might have gone to football games, lacrosse games. You might have spent a lot of time on campus, but never gone on an official tour. If you're an out-of-state student or an international student, you might never have really been able to come to campus because it's a financial hurdle. So for us, tracking whether a student has visited, whether they're interested, it's just not helpful to our process because we wouldn't want to put our students in a weird or unfair situation where just because, Johnny's able to take the official tour 10 times, it's going to increase his chances, whereas, Susie Q from down the road has never visited, but just still loves Maryland just as much. We will assume you're interested because you're applying. Now, to the first half of the question about yield protect, that's not something we do. I'm not as familiar with schools that might run a process like that. For us, if we have a student who seems like a rock star and we think they're a good fit for the University of Maryland, absolutely we're going to admit them. There's a lot of really good information online. There's a lot of rumors online as well. I love sites like Reddit and College Confidential for information sharing at large, but I also think sometimes they can be a little risky in terms of things in the rumor mill there, which is a long way of saying we do not have quotas for any counties, for any high schools, or anything of the likes. We do have an in-state ratio that we do need to admit by. We have to admit 70% of our students from the state of Maryland, and we do. Who says yes to us after we say yes to them is more up to students in terms of who we yield, but we don't have any caps for any particular counties. That being said, we've gone in my time working here. My first year working here professionally full-time was 2016. That year we had 27,000 applications, and it was record-breaking. This year we had 61,000, give or take, and it was record-breaking. I admittedly have been here longer than I like to admit sometimes age-wise, but I really say that to show we've really seen a crazy increase in the numbers of application. And what that means is we have the unfortunate job sometimes of deciding between excellent students who definitely could do the work. It might sound like a cop-out, but I promise you I mean it 100% true. The vast majority of students who apply to Maryland could do phenomenally here. It's very rare that I open up an application and it's an easy no. Students aren't applying with a lot of F's. Students aren't applying with a lot of D's. We're not making decisions between, an easy decision, so to speak, in terms of a competitive process. We really have the I guess, honor of reading fabulous applications, but 60,000 of them for a class of 4,700. So we have to make some very, very fine distinctions. I know that was a very long answer, but really to sum it up, no quotas from any particular county or high school, no caps of that likes, and no, we do not yield protect either.
Great. Thank you so much for that. The next few questions, I'm going to kind of lump them in a similar category because they're all around test scores. So one question that we have, so why would one choose to submit a test score or not?
Yeah, that's a great question. So again, this is going to be pretty personal student to student. I often frame it this way. If you feel like your test scores are reflective of your academic ability, maybe you're a student who wants to send them. There are students who just feel like their scores really don't reflect their academic ability as well as maybe just their transcript does, and maybe those students want to go test optional. A lot of students, and really the reason we went test optional to begin with was in response to the pandemic, might just make the decision simply based on they weren't able to sit for an exam. We're a little bit luckier, knock on wood, if you're joining us from the state of Maryland with testing availability. But on the West Coast and some of our Midwest states, it's still very much a struggle to find testing centers that have availability. So for some students, it might surely be the answer that they just weren't able to sit for the SAT or ACT. Last piece there is keep in mind the test scores are used not only for your admission review, but for merit scholarships as well. So if you're a student who just feels like maybe your scores aren't as competitive at large for our process, maybe you want to leave them, and that's okay.
Great. Similar questions related to scores. So does Maryland super score or take the highest aggregate SAT score?
We super score. So if you sit for multiple exams on the SAT or ACT, we'll take your highest sections for that to make your best SAT composite, best ACT composite, and use whatever would best benefit you there.
Right. And then do you need to send AP scores with your application, or can you wait until if you are admitted?
That's a good question. I strongly recommend waiting to send them until after you're admitted. And the reason I say that is we don't use them for admission purposes and they cost money to send. College applications, they add up quickly. You can earn credit via AP exam at the University of Maryland, but I'd rather you spend the money sending those scores once you know you're enrolled at the university May 1st and onward.
Great. And then one more question kind of related to scores. What GPA is required for admission without SAT or ACT scores?
Yeah, so just like I shared before, it's really hard to say one particular GPA. The truth is, I could say the average GPA is a 4.2. And at some high schools, that means getting a lot of C's and really a lot of honors classes. At my high school, getting a 4.0 was the highest GPA you could possibly get, even if you were in every single honors class. So I promise it's not a cop-out, but really GPA is just not telling for us. It's apples to oranges to grapes. If anyone from New York is on the call, I'm sure a couple people are. They use a 100 scale at their public schools. So really the GPA is very different. For us, the vast majority of our admitted students will have earned mainly A's with some B's, seldom if any C's, in some of the most demanding classes available to them. Some of the most demanding. I didn't say take every single one or that you have to, but typically admitted students this past year, again, mostly A's with some B's, seldom with any C's, very demanding classes.
Great. Next couple questions are related to housing. So are you guaranteed on-campus housing if you choose to be in the Freshman Connection program? Also, are you only able to dorm in certain residence halls?
So if you confirm your housing by May 1, which is the housing deadline, then yes, you would be guaranteed it through Freshman Connection. If you decided later in the summer you want to do Freshman Connection, it would depend on housing availability at that point. And then I'm sorry, I sound glitched out for a second, so I don't know if you said this or not, but I see it on here, so I'll answer it too as now. Regarding which students can live in the new heritage community, this is where I will admit I do not know. Sometimes as the admissions office, we know a little bit about a lot across campus. I would say check ResLife's website or shoot them an email. They would know best for that one. I'm sorry, I should know that, but I do not.
Great. All right. So going more on the application process. So of the 24 review factors considered for admissions, gender and geographic origin are listed. So how are these factors used to evaluate a student's application or student applicants' academic potential, and which genders and origins are weighted more favorable than others?
Yeah, well, I'm glad that this question got brought up because I think maybe there's a misunderstanding then of the 24 factors. The 24 factors are not a rubric. So it's not to say that, if I identify as a woman, that's held more favorably in our process. Really, these are the 24 factors to get to know you. But I can say that being a woman has impacted my lived experience. So how I frame that experience in my application and vice versa, if I identify as a man, is a factor. Same thing with geographic origin. It's not to say that, if you're from, I'll make up a county. If you're from Doran County, that's my maiden name, that we're going to heavily emphasize your admission as an in-state student or out-of-state student. But at the same time, we do want every county in Maryland represented on our campus. We do want as many states and countries represented in terms of, contributing to the diversity. So it's not to say that if I saw a student is from Alaska, where we don't see a lot of applicants from each year, that they're automatically admitted. But, just in the way that a student who has a lot of extracurriculars versus a student who has none because they work versus a student who has neither of those because they have a special role at home. It's all a part of their lived experience. It really just ties into getting to know them and their overall story. So never think of these 24 factors as a checkbox where just because you said, for example, that you're a first generation college bound student, that means you're automatically admitted or you're automatically not. but it's a part of your lived experience, and that, of course, can certainly impact your whole application at large, as well as your academics and the story you decide to tell through your application materials.
Great. Next question. If you are admitted in the spring, will you still graduate on time?
Good question. So I don't want to say yes 100% just because on time might mean something a little bit different to each student. But typically, yes, the reason Freshman Connection came about was to keep students on that graduation timeline. So if you're spring admitted and choose to spend the fall taking classes, yes, you should be able to stay on the same timeline as planned. If you choose not to participate in Freshman Connection and you take classes elsewhere, or maybe you spend a couple summers or winters taking courses, you might still be able to stay on that timeline as well.
Right. Question about, I think you already answered this, Maggie, but really quickly, what is the percentage of in-state versus out-of-state applicants admitted each year?
Yeah, so it's 70 to 30%. And that I typically will be the same at all Maryland State institutions.
Great. Could you give a little more information on the Maryland Transfer Advising Program? And is that through the regular admissions office? And is the November 1st early action deadline applicable?
Yeah, I can drop a link to our website in the chat in just a second too. But the Maryland Transfer Advantage Program, so that you wouldn't be applying to as a prospective freshman, but if you are a transfer student, you might be able to apply to. And it's at certain community colleges in the state of Maryland. And essentially, it's just a program that if you complete the requirements and you're in the program, you're guaranteed admission as long as you apply early action as a transfer student. If it's not at your community college in Maryland or you're out of state, I don't want you to get nervous because what you'll notice is the requirements are what we share makes a competitive transfer student. And I'll drop that in the chat in just a second if I can pull that on up. I want to say the next deadline for that off the top of my head is November 15th. But you can fact check me on the website because I have not looked at it this summer.
Great. Another question. So, do you look at applications as they come in, or do you wait until November 1st for all of the early action applications?
Good question. So we will not start looking at applications until after the deadline. So I strongly recommend not waiting until November 1st, but in theory, someone who does all of their submissions on the 1st could be looked at the same day as someone who submits all their stuff today.
Right. Still a little confused on SAT. Oh, I think that someone is typing for that one. Let's go to a different question. Let's see. If there are only 5,000 freshmen admitted, how are there 30,000 undergraduate students, and what makes up the other 10,000 students?
Yeah, so they might be joining us as transfer students. They might be a student who is not graduating in 4 years. They could be a non-traditional student returning. There's something in the state of Maryland called Golden ID, which allows Maryland residents over, I want to say 60 or 65, to take classes at a state institution up to a certain level for free. But at large, mostly that's going to be transfer students. Again, we typically have about 1,000 join us in the fall and around a little under 1,000 in the spring as well.
Right. So as alumni, both parents are now living out of state. Knowing that legacy is no longer a consideration, is there anything we can do to express interest since legacy is not a factor?
Yeah, and I apologize. Perhaps I was unclear on this before. It has never been a factor in our process. So this is not a recent change. This, as just mentioned, this is our 7th annual session. I'm in the hot seat every year explaining that no, it's not something we consider in our admission process. So it's not a different change. The application process a few years ago versus 10 years ago versus now, not something we're considering. I think the number one thing is making sure everything's in by November 1st. We will assume you're interested because you're applying.
Great. So our high school, another kind of niche question about Montgomery County. Our high school in Lower Montgomery County, also called a W school, specifically it told us that Maryland will not consider students from our school if they have a C on their transcript. Is that true? As it seems that some contradict some of the early answers.
Yeah, that is absolutely not true. You could have straight Fs and you could say, I want my test scores considered, and I have a 0 on the SAT. And we will read every single part of your application. Is that student competitive? Probably not. Probably not if they have straight Fs. But we are going to read everything that you send us. And again, I didn't say no Cs. It's typically mostly As, some Bs, seldom if any Cs. I've lived through a lot of different iterations of our admission process. It is admittedly a lot more competitive than it was when I first started. That is unfortunately sometimes the nature of when we go from 27,000 applications to 60,000. So I know this is specific about one county being cited there, but whether you're from that school, that county, any other school, no, there's nothing you could say in the application, barring anything that is, I guess, hateful or dangerous that would cause us to not read your entire application. All the way through, and to give it the full 24 factor review, to give it a full committee review, and to ensure that it's given the appropriate time and energy.
Right. And sorry, just to clarify one of the other questions. So knowing that Maryland doesn't consider expressed interest, is there anything for folks that are out of state, so any out of state applicants that they can do to kind of express interest in the university?
Gotcha. Nope. We will assume you're interested because you're applying, so don't worry about it there. Again, and I know I said 70% of our applicants are admitted from the state of Maryland. I hope it doesn't come across that our out-of-state students are, at a big loss in our pool. Truth be told, the way the numbers have worked out over the last decade or so that I've been a part of the process, it's not an advantage or disadvantage either way. I think if you run the numbers separately, it always comes out to like 0.001 difference. So really, in and out of state, our students are treated nearly identically in our process.
Great.
And no, if there are multiple children, we would not consider that. So same thing, alumni status. You can rest assured, students, that if you're admitted, it is fully on your own merit, not worrying about anyone else in your family and where they did or did not go to school.
Great. Another question. We have like a couple more left. So how many students do you accept via the guaranteed admission pathway and dual degree partnership for Maryland to the University of Maryland School of Nursing? It's a very niche question.
Yeah, I truthfully, that can change a little bit year to year, but the only thing you would have to do to be considered for that is list pre-nursing as an interest on your application. And then those decisions will actually come out in mid-March. And for anyone who's unfamiliar, this is kind of a pretty cool opportunity where students are a part of the University of Maryland College Park for 2 years, and then they fully matriculate to the University of Maryland School of Nursing. I know all our state schools sound very, very similar, but they are separate schools, either in Baltimore or in Shady Grove. And in terms of, I can't remember how many students were admitted to this year, but as long as you indicate interest, you'll be reviewed for it. The invites will go out in March, and even students who are not invited to it can pursue the pathway after their first academic year at Maryland by meeting with the pre-nursing office and doing kind of an audit of sorts.
Great. So if a student is interested in double majoring, should they list both majors?
So you actually can only enter as one major. So whatever your first choice of major is, I would suggest listing. Or if it's a limited enrollment program, I say go for that one. That way you can see what your decision is there. And if you're admitted, great. You can pursue your second major as early as your first semester. And if not, maybe we switch your major to your second choice at that point.
Great. And then what is the percentage of the 40,000 plus applications for in-state?
Good question. I actually don't believe we have public data on that, mostly because you have to imagine that changes quite a bit each year. The population in each state, Maryland and otherwise, really can shift quite a bit, depending on how many babies were born and are college bound that academic year. So unfortunately, I don't have that information in front of me, but we tend to see, again, we admit 70% of our students from Maryland. And in terms of who says yes to enrolling, it usually works itself out to be about 70% of our students. But in theory, if a lot more out-of-state students say yes to our offer admission 1 year, our enrolled student ratio could be a little bit different.
Great. And then a couple more questions in the chat. So does Maryland have a dual business and engineering program?
Not in the sense that you could be applying to this right now, but we do have some what we call +1 programs where in the School of Business, for example, they have a +1 where you add an additional year. You start working on some of your masters in finance, your masters in information systems, whatever it may be during your junior year. And then your senior year, you're really jumping into your master's work. I believe there are a couple +1 programs in engineering as well. I will admit as well, these are not something you'd apply to as an incoming freshman. Typically juniors or maybe late sophomores are applying at the university. So I'm not as familiar robustly with their program offerings, but there are some +1s you can pursue here. I know there are some institutions where it might be, if you get in as a freshman, you're guaranteed admission to this physical therapy program or this engineering graduate school. We don't have any of those functioning right now.
Great. I see a really fun question. I'll leave that for the end.
I know, I love
Um,
it. That's because we
but
had the smile realization at the same time.
um, so one more question before that one. So I understand that having an alumni relative is not considered in the admissions process, but is there a known percentage of admitted students who have
Hmm.
relatives who attended Maryland?
I actually, Jess, you might know better than I do. I
Yeah,
don't
I
know
was
the answer
gonna
to
say on my end, I
that.
don't know if we actually have that data concretely. So on my end from the Alumni Association, I don't think we have that data unless you have that, Maggie.
Yeah, I don't off the top of my head. I'll have to peek around for it. What I will say as someone who was an out-of-state student, I certainly never felt ostracized. Granted, I was from New Jersey, which arguably is the second state of the University of Maryland in terms of how many undergraduate students we send here. But whether you're in state and you knew 100 people from your high school, 10 people from your high school coming, I knew five from mine, nobody. It really is such a strong community, and you will feel a part of that Maryland family just like that. I promise you.
Great. Um, all right. One question about social data science. So could you possibly do multiple focuses?
That's a good question. Truth be told, again, that's where I promise not a cop out, but I will say admissions hat. I know a little bit about a lot. I'm not sure, but I bet the College of Behavioral and Social Sciences advising office would certainly be able to address that question for you.
Great. And I know one question is getting answered by Raquel in the chat. And then our last question that we will end on. So, will rubbing Testudo's nose and bringing him gifts give an applicant an edge?
I have to say, definitely, and as we know, a lot of us who are alum in the room, it's scientifically proven to actually be good luck. We've seen it when the scaffolding covered him a few semesters, the GPA went down, went back up when it was uncovered. So yes, it will. Sorry, I'm gonna have to respectfully disagree. It can give you an edge. An edge doesn't mean a guarantee, but it can give you an edge.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us this evening. We hope that you have gotten your questions answered. So this concludes tonight's event. And best of luck to all of our prospective Terps that were on the call who are in the process of applying potentially this fall or soon after. And once we have the final webinar recording available, we'll be sure to send it via email. So if you registered for this event, you'll get it sent to the email address that you used to register for this event. And hopefully we'll get that to you all in the next week or so. And we will also put our contact information in that email as well in case you have any further questions. So with that being said, go Terps, and enjoy the rest of your evenings. Thank you, everyone.
Good night, all.